Hi guys, welcome to your disease video notes. So first of all, what is the definition of disease? So disease is anything that's non-injury related that changes homeostasis. If you remember, homeostasis is just the ability to have a constant internal environment. So these are things like, don't mind my terrible handwriting, these are things like pH in your blood, your heart rate, your blood pressure. All of these things are regulated by homeostasis in your body. So there's two ways that you can get a disease. So it's communicable or inherited. Communicable, we see that every year, right? Everyone comes back to school after summer break and everybody gets sick because you're all bringing all these germs together that you've kind of been exposed to throughout the summer, and then it never fails, something's going to go around. And then inherited, that's of course what you get through your DNA from your parents. So how does our body fight disease? We have something called an immune system. So we have these things called antibodies. These are the good guys, and they're shaped like little Ys, and they just kind of go all over your body and they hunt down bacteria and viruses and other toxic things that we don't want in our bodies. Antigens, on the other hand, these are the bad guys. So these are the toxic or the foreign substances that cause that immune response in your body. So the antibodies are looking for the antigens, and they match with specific antigens. And this is also why you never get the same infection twice. You may get a cold every year, but you're getting a different strain of the cold because you already have those antibodies made to fight the antigens from last year's cold, so you won't ever have symptoms from that strain. So the body's defenses. So there's actually three lines of defense. There's nonspecific and specific. So nonspecific defense, the first line is your skin. Of course, that's your body's biggest organ, and it protects you in more ways than one. You also have mucous membranes. These are in your nose and your mouth. Second line of defense is those phagocytic white blood cells. So they are like moving through your body, just kind of hunting down those bad guys and eating them. You also have an inflammatory response. So inflammatory or inflamed, you know from before, if you've hurt something or you're sick, right, it gets swollen. So your body's going to inflame the area. And that third line of defense is your lymphocytes and your antibodies. These are the ones that are specific to certain antigens. So specific immunity. So talking about lymphocytes, there are two kinds. There's B cells and T cells. So these circulate the body, and they're mostly in your spleen and your lymph nodes, and they just recognize those invaders and they respond to them, and they recognize specific ones. So they're not just generic. And the foreign invaders, like we talked about, the bad guys, are antigens, and those B cells release those antibodies, or the good guys, that you need. So immunological memory. So when a lymphocyte is selected by an antigen, or it pairs with an antigen, it forms two clones. So it's going to make one clone that's going to beat that antigen right then. It's going to help you start feeling better. It's going to get rid of that antigen from your body. But it also makes a memory cell. And this memory cell is why you don't get infected later. So those memory cells are going to stay in your body. So next time an antigen of that specific kind makes its way into your body, those antibodies are going to jump right on it, and you won't even have any symptoms most of the time. So the primary response then is just that initial response, right? You get sick, you feel really bad for a couple weeks. It's when your body is starting to create those antibodies to attack the antigens. Your secondary response would be your second exposure. So if you're ever exposed to that same one again, those antibodies are already there. They're going to respond much faster. You may not even have symptoms, or just a day or two. So immune responses. So you have something called humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. Humoral immunity is your B cells. So those B cells are going to activate, they're going to create those antibodies, and they're going to circulate in your blood plasma and your lymph nodes and your lymph, and they're trying to find bacteria, viruses, and toxins in your body fluids that they can just attack and kill and get rid of. The cell-mediated immunity is T cell activation. So this can only happen if the cell is already infected. So if the cell already has a disease, then these T cells are going to help that cell get rid of it. And it's also good for parasites. So this is also really common if you've ever known anyone that's had a transplant of an organ. They have to take medication so their body doesn't reject it, because what happens is your immune response thinks it's an invader and it's going to start attacking it. So usually they take some sort of medication. sometimes for the rest of their lives, to prevent their body from attacking this organ. So what happens when the body attacks itself? So we have something called allergies or autoimmune diseases, and I'm sure you're familiar with both. So allergies is just simply the body's overreaction to a harmless antigen. So allergies aren't supposed to cause reactions. I'm sure we know people that don't have allergies and we're very jealous of them, right? But when you do have allergies, what happens is you're exposed to that antigen and you have something called histamine in your body. And it causes all of your blood vessels to get leaky. So you're blowing your nose all the time, your eyes are watery, you're sneezing. All of those symptoms are from that histamine. But interestingly enough, what do we take when we have allergies? We take something called an antihistamine. So that's going to counteract those effects of that histamine in your blood vessels. So anaphylactic shock, you may have known someone that has to carry around an EpiPen. And what this means is when you go into anaphylactic shock, it's basically an allergic reaction, but it's life-threatening. So that histamine that causes your runny nose and your eyes is going to be all released at one time and cause the body to drop its blood pressure. A lot of times people with these kind of allergies too, their throats close up, they can't breathe. They may have gone to a restaurant and asked for no peanuts and there was still peanut that touched their food. Some people are very, very sensitive. They can't even smell it and they have an allergic reaction. So it's very, very harmful. It can cause death in just a few minutes. So that EpiPen is very important that they carry around because it has something called epinephrine in it and it counteracts that extreme allergic response. Autoimmune diseases then are a little different. So auto meaning self. So autoimmune is when your body attacks itself. So those antibodies that are supposed to be the good guys somehow get tricked into attacking your body. And this causes a lot of issues. So the problem here is that there's really no cure. You only take some form of treatment sometimes to relieve the symptoms. You can also go through long periods of remission with little or no symptoms at all. But then when you have those flare-ups, your symptoms are really bad and it makes life very, very difficult. Some examples here are things like rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, IBD or irritable bowel disease, and then psoriasis. And I'm sure you've seen lots of commercials about medications for these diseases, but it's important to know that none of them are going to cure it. They're just going to help relieve some of those symptoms. So another thing to know about is an immunodeficiency disease. So this is when your body can no longer defend itself like it used to. So your immune system is compromised. And this can go against bacteria, viruses, parasites. You can have it at birth, or you can actually get a virus such as HIV, and it causes you to have an immunodeficiency disease as a result. Most people that have HIV or AIDS, they don't always die from AIDS. They usually die from some other sort of disease that gets into their immune system and their body can't fight it. So some other causes too, things like chemotherapy, radiation, burns, even diabetes. People with diabetes have to be really careful that they're treating their body well and taking care of themselves. They can have sores and things and even have limbs amputated. So it's really important that if you're someone that has an immunodeficiency disease, you have to be very careful. Some examples, things like bubble boy disease, or you've heard people say about, they live in a bubble, or you maybe have seen things on TV, but it's also known as SCID. Also, immune system cancers like leukemia, and then of course, AIDS, HIV is the most common. It's also important to note that when you first get that disease, it's HIV at onset, and it becomes AIDS once your helper T cell count drops. Now, some people progress very slowly between HIV and AIDS. Some people never even progress into AIDS, and some people progress very quickly. It all depends on your body and the disease. So there's 4 other types of disease to briefly talk about: bacterial, viral, parasitic, and hereditary. So bacterial disease, easy enough, caused by bacteria. They produce poisonous substances and they cause our body to have a reaction. These can be killed by antibiotics, however, so it's probably the easiest type of disease to treat. Unfortunately, though, there have been antibiotic-resistant bacteria that are becoming more and more prevalent. So it's important that if you have a bacterial disease, that's the only time you're taking antibiotics. Don't take them for a viral disease. And then common examples: pneumonia, Lyme disease, and gonorrhea, or even things like food poisoning. Common cold is a virus. So remember, food poisoning and strep throat, those are things that you can take antibiotics for. Things like the common cold is a virus. So your viral diseases are small non-living organisms, and they inject their DNA into you, which is kind of gross when you think about it. And you become the host and you make more viruses for them, so they don't have to do any of the work. And unfortunately, like I said, they can't be killed by antibiotics. Vaccines are good for viruses, but only as a preventative. You can't take a vaccine once you get a virus. Then it's too bad. It's too late for that. There also are some antivirals that are becoming more and more common, but there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on them. So examples of really common viral diseases: hepatitis, polio, herpes, measles, and HIV. So parasitic disease is caused by a variety of organisms as well. And antibiotics can kill some of these, but the tough part here is sometimes we're accidental hosts. We don't mean to be the host, it's just kind of how it works out. So examples here are things like giardia, crabs, malaria, swimmer's itch, and that blue arrow is pointing to a botfly removal, and we'll watch a couple kind of gross videos in class of this. So finally, hereditary disease. So these are exactly what you would expect. They're inherited from your parents, they're genetic disorders. There have been a lot of progressions in genetic engineering and gene therapy, so it's starting to become more common, and more testing, of course, still needs to be done, but it is something we can definitely move towards in the future. And examples here: Down syndrome, hemophilia, sickle cell anemia, and muscular dystrophy. And that is all for your notes.